And hello, ladies and gentlemen. Robert Swartwood here. Tonight, our guest has been lending her voice to commercials, promos, live announce shows, and audiobooks for almost 30 years. She has recorded over 800 audiobooks and is known for portraying kick-ass protagonists who take no prisoners. Her work has garnered multiple SOVA, Earphone, Audiofile Best of, and Audie finalist awards. That's right, it's your favorite narrator and mine, Hillary Huber. Hillary,
Oh,
how are
Huber.
you?
It's Huber.
God damn it. I
That's the
You
one
know
thing we
what?
didn't check, isn't it?
In the very beginning, I even thought I'm like, I gotta make sure because again, at the beginning of every time you narrate an audiobook, you say it, but it has been a little while since I listened to one of your. Okay, so
Uh-huh.
anyway, hi,
Hi.
how are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Well, and then we can get into that because I know that that often happens where there is like preferred, like I just did an audio original that's going to be coming out, and the narrator had basically emailed like, oh, there's certain things like how is this supposed to be pronounced, and then I realized at one point I'm like, okay, obviously I should not have used this one character's name because it's too overtly complicated, like just I
Yes,
don't know.
please, authors, don't do that to
Yeah, well, we're
us.
going to get into pet peeves and whatever else and other like tips you might have for some authors.
Right.
But all right, so let's get into you've narrated over 800 audiobooks, which
Isn't
is
that
insane.
exhausting? I know.
But obviously, and we talked a little bit in the green room, like probably you didn't grow up, thinking one day, oh, I'm going to be an audiobook narrator. Like what did you initially, when you were younger, like what was the career path you had your heart set on?
Um, I didn't, I wouldn't say I had much of a career path, and I wasn't really guided by my parents to think about a career path. I always acted all through school. I acted, I danced, I did art. I was always a creative person. And when I went to college, I wanted to major in graphic design. And my mother put the kibosh on that. She said, no, no, you can't. That's too specific. You will major in English. That's the only time she guided me. If you can read well and write well, you can do anything. That was her advice. So I majored in English. I saved all of my English classes until like senior year, where I had to take 5 lit classes each term because I was too busy taking theater and art classes. And then when I graduated from college, I bounced around, just did whatever jobs I can kind of get my hands on. And my husband was in advertising, and I was around ad people all the time who would say, well, you should do voiceover. You should do voiceover because of my voice. I've sounded like this my whole life. It hasn't really aged very much. I came out sounding like a old lady, a drag queen. That's what I like to say. I sound like a drag queen. Um, so I got into commercial voiceover here in Los Angeles, and it was great. I came in at the right time for my particular style, which was pretty snarky and straightforward, and the market was ripe for that. And I had a really, really good run, but there came a point about 10 years in when I just started thinking, this is great and it's fun, but am I really doing anything fulfilling? Am I filling my cup, my creative cup, doing Slurpee commercials? And I also, so that was on a self fulfillment um, trajectory. But at the same time, I would see older women come into our talent agency, and they'd be given one piece of copy to audition, and I'd be given 10 because I was in the demographic and they were aging out of the demographic. And they had this look of panic on their faces because that's all they had was doing commercial voiceover. And their opportunities were evaporating. And I thought, damn, I need another color on my palette. I've got to do something else that will give me longevity. And audiobooks filled both those buckets. This is 20 years ago. Dare I say 20? No, it was 20 years ago. 20 years ago. So it was a pretty nascent um, industry at that point. And I thought, this is creative. I can use all of my acting chops, and I can also do this forever. And so I started researching and figuring out how to do audiobooks. And slowly it started to overtake my commercial career. And now I do almost all audiobooks, and I've aged out of the demographic in commercials. I don't do very many anymore.
Yeah,
I'd
so on
like
your
to, but
website, you have a whole list of campaigns that you've done, like Toyota, Bird's Eye, Mercedes, Tylenol, Walmart, McDonald's. I mean, it
yeah,
just
yeah, it
goes
was
on and
good.
on. So, do you remember the very first one you did?
I sure do. It was Juicy Juice. I booked
Juicy
10
juice.
national TV commercials for Juicy Juice. And they no, I take it back. It was Bird's Eye. It was Bird's Eye. 10 national commercials for Bird's Eye, and they flew me to San Francisco. And I couldn't believe it. It was like, are you kidding? It was magic. That was my very first job. It was crazy.
And so when you have a voiceover like work like that, what all does that entail in terms of I mean, like we've all seen these commercials. I'm sure, people have probably without even knowing it have probably seen something that you've done throughout the years. Um, you know what I mean? Like they're not even probably 20 seconds long, but I mean, I'm sure it takes a lot of, prep or
A lot of
whatever else
takes.
to, yeah, I mean, like what's that process like?
You go into the you're a cog in a wheel. I got to tell you, you really are. You're one little piece of a really big puzzle. So I mean, now people do them from home, but we would have to drive halfway across LA, go to a studio, get put in a booth. You usually had people from the ad agency there. Sometimes you'd have the client there. Sometimes the client would be on a phone. You'd have your engineer, and they'd give you your copy, and you record it, and they go, oh yeah, can you just do it again, speed it up a little bit, can you do it again, can you hit this word, can you do it again better, can you do it again faster, slower, peppier, we don't like the way you're saying that, and you do it again, you do it again. And then they'd say, okay, we're going to call the client, or the client's there, or now we're going to talk, or now we're going to mix it, and you just sitting there and they're mixing it with the image, with the images on camera, they're mixing it with music. And sometimes they come back and go, great, you're done. And sometimes they come back and go, yeah, we're going to start over again. And you do it again. So every now and then you'd be in and out of there in 15 minutes. And sometimes you'd be there for hours. It was different every time, but it was really fun because you drove all over LA, you'd run into people. Every studio you went to were voiceover friends. And if you had a job that where you were simultaneously recording with other friends in the booth, it was great. I'll tell you one little story. I got hired to do this commercial for a cell phone company, and they just booked me, and they booked me and five other people. And we got to the studio, and they put us all in the room. No, they had us each go in, and they said, we want you each to give us like 5 takes of "It's the Network." So we each went in, we're like, it's the network, it's the network, it's the network, it's the network, it's the network. They listened to it, and they're like, okay, here's the one we like. And they picked one of our takes. And then they had all of us, 6 of us, go in, stand around the microphone and go, it's the network, move us around. It's the network, move us around. It's the network, move us around. And in between, we were just chatting and having a great time and eating snacks. And they took all of those recordings and they multiplied them by like 500. They layered them on top, on top, on top. So in the commercials, there was the main spokesperson talking about the cellular network, and there were a sea of people behind them that all said, it's the network. And they ran on TV commercials over and over and over for like a year. And we would just get these fat ass checks in the mail for having hung out with a bunch of friends for an hour in a studio. It was madness. And whenever
Was
we'd
that
see each other, we'd be like, it's the network.
was that Verizon?
Was it Verizon? Is
I
that their
think
logo?
so. Isn't the one where he was going around? Can you hear me now? And then I don't know.
Yeah, it might have
Um,
been.
so were there times where you'd have to do like multiple days, or was everything usually done in just one day?
No, it was usually done in one day. Maybe they do edits sometimes and they bring you back. I mean, it depends how big the campaign was. I did a Toyota campaign that was huge. It was the launch of a Camry, and that probably took a couple days because there were 10 spots in that campaign too. And that might have been over a few days. But once you get into the groove of the sound, you can kind of go through them.
Yeah. So it also says so you've announced for like the Emmys and the People's Choice Awards.
Yeah.
I would imagine that is a little bit more um
Stressful.
nerve-wracking. Yeah, nerve-wracking
Do
because
you want
it's
to say
like it's not like you
stressful?
can take like 20 takes,
No.
like you're live.
It's
Like how did
so
that,
unbelievably stressful.
yeah,
So
what was
you
that like?
sit, you sit at a, depending, I've been in trucks in the driveway. I've been in booths they make in an attic. I've been backstage. Um, and and you have a box that one button on it makes your mic live, and another button you can make your mic live, and then you have to hit it again to turn it off, and then you have another button that lets you hear the truck where all the directors are. No, actually, you hear that all the time. In one ear you have the truck where the director is, and you hear them going, okay, cue camera 5, zoom in, lights. You're hearing all the direction of what's going on in this live performance. And then you have a screen and you're watching it, and you have your script, and you don't necessarily know who the winner is, right? So you have to be following around along because you have to announce the walk up and here walking to the stage. So you're watching the show and you know there's an announce coming, and all of a sudden the director starts yelling, okay, cue announce. And you get ready and they're like, announce, announce, announce. And you have to hit the button and hit your announce. And then you have to remember to hit the button again and turn your mic off. Because if you're me, you're going to make some snarky remark about what that actress is wearing, and God forbid I don't hit the mic off and it goes live to the entire house. So it's really stressful, but it's also super energizing because you're just on, right? I work a lot for Prudential. I get sent around the country to go to their awards weekends when they take their top earners and give them all these awards. And I get a weekend in like the Bahamas, and then I announce the shows. So that's kind of fun.
Very nice. Now, is that
Yeah.
something where you have to like with the voiceovers for a while you would have to audition for things, or were you
Yes.
at a place where they kind of knew like, okay, you know what, we want to use Hillary for this?
Sometimes you usually auditioned. Every now and then you just get booked. We would often you get copy. We would go to audition in our agent's office. You go in and you'd sit in the waiting room and chat, and they'd come and hand you your copy, and you'd go into a booth, come out, go into a booth. And every now and then you'd get a piece of copy. You get your stack, and somebody across the way would go, oh, you're not going to get that Wendy's spot. And you'd be like, well, why aren't I? And you'd look on the copy and it would say at the bottom under the specs, we want somebody who's has a throaty, sarcastic voice, kind of like Hillary Huber. And you're like, why don't you just hire me? But it was always the death knell when your name was on the spec. You knew you were never going to get it.
Oh, wow. That is crazy. Okay,
Oh,
so you did that for a while, and then like you said, you eventually realized there so the audiobook like at that time. So, do you remember the year like when you first started doing this? Because for people, I mean, nowadays they might not realize that audiobooks were never as ubiquitous as they are now. I mean, back in the
right.
day, like not every book was an audiobook because it was a
No,
lot
not at
of work. I
all.
mean, it would like, they were literally cassette tapes
They were cassette tapes.
or they were CDs. I remember usually I would
They
just
were
get them
cassette tapes
from
first. Yeah.
yeah, from the library where it would be like a whole book of like 10 discs. It was like an hour per disc. Now you just can just download, an audiobook on your phone and you can have 50 on your phone at any time. So, so really, I mean, like nowadays, if it feels like every book that is published has an audiobook as well. In the past, that wasn't always the case. Like there were a lot
No.
of books that didn't have any audiobooks. So were you listening to audiobooks? I mean, how did you kind of say like, oh, you know what, this is something maybe I want to get into?
Yeah, I was. I used to go and check out like at a Blockbuster for audiobooks. You could go and check them out and get cassettes and listen to them in your car. So my first book was in 2005, and I was aware of audiobooks, and my first book, well, I knew of an audiobook publisher producer rather, in Ashland, Oregon, called Blackstone. And I pitched them a book. I sent them a bell jar I checked out, I found out that a bell jar hadn't been made into audio by Sylvia Plath. And I sent them the bell jar and I sent a sample of me reading it on a CD or disc or something. And I said, I'd love to narrate this book for you. And they wrote me back and said, you would be great reading that book. Unfortunately, the rights are not available. But we do have A Very Easy Death by Simone de Beauvoir, and we think you'd be great at that too. So that was my first book, Very Easy Death by Simone de Beauvoir, which was pretty good. And last year, it just came out a couple months ago. I just did another Simone de Beauvoir book, which felt really cool because it's been 20 years and it's kind of a nice bracket to my career.
Yeah. Wow. So, wow, okay. So you really were very much like, like you were hustling to try
I
to
was
become
hustling.
a
My
that
agent, my
that is
agent
crazy.
would didn't know anything about it. They won't touch audiobooks with a 10-foot pole.
Yeah.
There's not enough money in it for them. They're like, oh, anytime anybody calls them with anything to do with audiobooks, they're like, call Hillary, she'll answer your questions. It's so weird.
Yeah.
They don't like
Well,
it.
because I guess audiobooks is very like you had mentioned before about voiceover works, at least I don't know if it's the same now with how things are with TV and streaming, but in the past you would get residuals and stuff. So like depending on the campaigns, you could still get money coming in, whatever else.
Mhm.
With audiobooks, the majority of the time it's just kind of like for hire stuff. Like you just get paid, for so many hours of an audiobook and then that's it. Like the audiobook
That's
could
it.
kind
It's a
of
really touchy subject for us.
I bet because some audiobooks do amazing. Some audiobooks, not so much. So,
Not so
it's
much.
always, yeah.
Yeah, so that's okay. For the ones that do amazing, we wouldn't mind a little piece of that. But
But it also helps though, I guess, lift your star in terms of probably you
sure,
can then like,
absolutely.
charge more for your fees or whatever else for future
Yeah.
books. So there's always
Hmm.
kind of, I guess, a bright side, I guess. But yeah, I mean, it is a thing where some audiobooks, yes, some audiobooks do really well and some not so much. Let's get into the audiobooks. So then you started doing these audiobooks at this point, so you're over 800. Do you like how do you keep track at this point? Like, I mean, do you have a counter or like how do you know how many like when you hit a thousand?
I only know by going on Audible
Mm,
and seeing how many there are. And some of them have gone away. And it's funny because if I go on different browsers, there's certain browsers say I have over 700 books and certain browsers say I have over 800 books. But actually a colleague came up with a tool and that scours Audible and comes up with all of your books in chronological order.
oh
And
wow.
so I did that. And so, yeah, I don't know. I don't have like a spreadsheet of all the books I've done. I only know from Audible.
So on your website, it says that okay, part of your website is the audiobook narration. You've recorded over 800 audiobooks spanning many genres, but thrillers are your favorite. Do you remember the very first thriller that you had recorded?
No, no, I do not.
No.
Oh,
Okay.
actually, yes, I do. Yes, I absolutely do. Um, it was called Season of the Snake. Um, and it was about a serial killer. And it was dark. That was my very first one, Season of the Snake.
Season of the Snake. I'm not familiar with that. Who is that
Well,
author?
it was 18 years ago or something.
Yeah, but
So
is
now
it
I'm
on
gonna have
Audible
to,
still?
yeah, it should be. Looking
Season
it up
of
for
the
us.
Snake audiobook. Okay, so then you start, but I mean, like you've done a lot of different genres, but you
By
find
Claire
that,
Davis. There it is.
yeah, oh wow, okay. All right, everyone go check that out.
No, don't listen to the very first one. No, it was probably awful.
Well, you know
Ah.
what? That gets into something I was going to get to, but let's talk about that. So, I mean, obviously, like what if you could go back to, the narrator you were when you were right before you recorded Season of the Snake? I mean, is there anything that like you wish you would have known, like that you feel that like right now you're probably more confident in terms of, back then there are certain things maybe in prep or whatever else. I mean, like 800 audiobooks or even 700 is obviously a lot. I don't know. I mean,
Yeah,
just
I don't,
you feel much more
I know.
confident, I would assume.
What would you tell your narrator self of yesteryear? I don't know. I almost feel like sorry, there's a little banging going on.
Yeah, that's all right.
I almost feel like there's something pure. I mean, I can't, I had the acting background, so I felt
Yeah.
confident in that. And there was something a little pure of not sort of being overstudied and thinking too much about what I was doing, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I probably second guess myself more now than I did then. There's something about innocence that um, just feels pure and natural to me. But
Yeah.
I should probably go listen to some of them and then I can come up with some ideas of what I should have done. But I don't want to listen to them, Robert. I
So
don't
what
want
type
to.
of prep were you doing? Like, were you doing different types of prep at that point?
No, I did the same. I probably was doing more prep then
Yeah.
than I do now. I mean, I read the book always, and
Do you read it like from start to finish the
I read the
entire
book from
thing?
start to finish. I
Okay.
absolutely do. Um, I will say, not always with nonfiction. I will
Right.
read part of the nonfiction just to get the authors, the timbre of their voice, whether they're for or against whatever subject they're talking about. But fiction, I read the whole thing, and I have colleagues who don't read the book, and that's embarrassing to me to admit that. I think that's really bad practice, but to each his own. I have colleagues who have preppers who prep the books for them, and they do, give them outlines of the plotting and all the characters, and so that they don't have to read the book. And I've tried that, and it didn't work for me because it's, you got to think about it. We're narrating all day, and then we got to come home and read a book. So it takes a lot of time, right?
Yeah.
Um, but that just didn't work for me because when I'm reading the book, it's the characters are marinating in my brain. And I'm thinking about what they sound like. I'm thinking about what their archetypes are. I'm thinking about what their drive is. I'm discovering how they are relationally with the other characters in the book. And so just to be given a plot summary and a character descriptions, I can't work from that. It doesn't, that's not my process. But I have a lot of friends who do it and it's great for them, but I gotta be in there and let those and marinate in those characters for a while.
Yeah.
And it's so important to read the book because I think every one of us has a horror story of not reading the book all the way through because maybe you didn't have time and then discovering that somebody had an accent.
Yeah. I've heard a Ray Porter story because reportedly he doesn't read the books, or he just sits
Yeah.
down and just starts writing, and he finds out like 5 chapters later, oh, this person's supposed to be Russian,
Yeah.
and like he hasn't been using,
Yeah, yeah,
an
no, that's the
accent.
nightmare. Some there's keywords you can, if you can't really read the whole thing, you can search for accent
Well,
or
at the same
drawl
time, I
or
would say that's also on the writer too. That's something that, if a
well,
character has an
yeah.
accent, that should be presented
Yeah,
pretty
that happened
early
to me. The
on.
book was three-quarters of the way. I'd read like 60% of it at like 70%. It was an awful book too. So badly written. And the book was just awful. I couldn't finish it because I was like, I just can't. And it wasn't for me. I hate to put down anybody's writing, but three-quarters of the way through, all of a sudden she just mentions that this character grew up in London. And it had nothing to do with the story. It could have been Zimbabwe. It could have been Boston. It had nothing to do with the story, but it made me have to go back and replace her dialogue. That's on me.
Yeah, so I've been playing around with this. I don't want to say it's a theory, but and you don't have to agree or disagree with this, but I always feel like a really great narrator can take an okay book and make it be a decent audiobook. And they can make a really good book be a really great audiobook, and but then you can have a narrator, a really bad narrator, take a really great book and really
And
just
ruin
bring
it.
down that quality.
I mean, I feel like you
Um,
just quoted me. I say that exact same thing all the time.
yeah.
I
So
couldn't agree with you more.
And so I feel like, I mean, you're obviously a narrator who, I know in the green room we were talking where, I mean, I love audiobooks. I listen to audiobooks a lot. there are definitely narrators that I just will not listen to books anymore if I see that their name's attached to them. I hate to say it. You're one that I see your name attached. It's like, okay, great. I don't I have to listen to a sample or whatever. I'm sure it's going to be great. Um, so beginning with when you started out with audiobooks, it really was probably very much like beggars can't be choosers in terms of like what type of projects you were taking on.
Hmm.
At this point, I imagine you can be a little bit more picky in terms of like, like I'm sure you get a lot of offers coming your way in terms of projects.
I love you, Robert. That's so nice to say.
So, am I not like,
You
am
know
I being
what?
too,
Yeah, you're being so generous right
oh,
now.
okay.
At the end of the day, we're actors. And
Yeah.
if we have time in our schedule, we'll read your book.
Yeah.
We really will. I have a
But,
bar. I have a bar, but it's pretty low.
okay.
Okay. It really is. I won't narrate anything too right wing. I won't narrate anything that glorifies violence against children. And I won't read anything that praise the gay away.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
that's my bar.
Okay. But
And
even
I
if
mean,
it's
there are
like
other things
poorly
I won't
written
read
though, you're
also.
like, you could
No,
tell
I
like this
mean,
was just,
if it's AI written, I just read a book a couple weeks ago that I swear was AI written.
oh,
But
wow.
if I've got time in my schedule, I'm freelance. I may not work next
Yeah.
month. And then I'll be like, why did you turn down that check?
But I
It's
imagine
a
you're kind of,
job. So
yeah.
I
Oh,
have to be
absolutely.
offended to not read the book.
Yeah.
I mean, let's face it. I'm lucky now because I genuinely like a lot of the books I get, but that's only in the last really few years. I started by doing a lot of vampire books because listen to me. Um, and it was fine. It was great. Their series where there's one vampire book, there's like 12 vampire books. So that became my thing, vampire books. And after a while, I was just like, you know what? I've mined this genre. I need to not do these anymore. So it was scary for me to say, please don't send me any more of these. I'm kind of done. Not that I hated them. I liked them actually. But I found that I have just by virtue of having relationships with publishers and producers, I'm able to say what I'm interested in. And then it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. The books that I like, I do well at, and I like to think I do well at every book, but they garner attention, and so I get more like that. So now I'm known as a thriller girl, definitely. I don't do a lot of fantasy. I don't do a lot of sci-fi. Those are not genres that I love. So I don't go after those, right? But there are people who love that and they can do those, and that's great. They can go after that. Not to say I won't do it because I will, and I will like a lot of them, but they're
Yeah.
not what I'm going to eagerly seek.
Yeah.
I'm gonna seek books about. I love memoirs and books about women who have like had something bad happen to them and they've had to rise from the ashes of their own self-destruction or destruction by others. For some reason, that appeals to me. And I like books about serial killers, which is really weird because I'm such a scaredy cat watching TV. And I won't read thrillers for pleasure because I get too scared. I mean, I
Well,
get scared when I see somebody going through somebody else's like underwear drawer. I'm like, oh my God, you're gonna get caught. Don't do it. I'm terrified. But
right.
for some reason, I can narrate the hell out of those.
So do you like because reading essentially is your job, do you are you able to then kind of turn your that side of your brain off and like read for pleasure now? Or is it just you just when you read you
Yeah. Yes and no. I love to read. And I don't really have very much time to actually read a book because if I'm reading a book, it's usually the book that I'm prepping for next week. But I listen. That I have time to do because I can listen as I walk to my studio. I listen when I'm doing housework. So I'm an avid listener. And it's a bit of a busman's holiday, isn't it? Because I'm critiquing the whole time I'm listening, or I'm admiring the whole time I'm listening. I'm stealing little performance bits that I love or try to emulate a little bit. So I try to incorporate the things that I like, and I pay attention to the things that I think don't work. So I can keep that in mind too. And every now and then I just get lost, but and I stop thinking, well, I do stop thinking, start thinking about the story more than the performance. But, I delight in a really good performance for sure.
When you listen to an audiobook, are you always listening at like just the regular speed, or do you kind of like,
100%. Yeah,
what are your
no.
thoughts on people who, because sometimes I'll see people like do it like a 2x speed and it's like, oh my God, how are you enjoying this?
Yeah, so that is a real good way to get an audiobook narrator's ire up is to tell us you're listening at a faster speed because we spend a lot of time on our pacing.
Yeah.
It's every story has a different pace. And we have the luxury of being able to set that pace and take time and hope that it's appropriate for the text. But I've had to back off on that ire a little bit because there are neurodivergent people, people with different things going on in their brains who can't listen at one speed and they have to speed it up. And there are sight challenged people who are so auditory that they need it to go faster. And so I've come to understand that and accept that. Absolutely. As long as people are listening, that's great. Would I like you to, relish in my performance? Absolutely. But what I really want is to tell you a story and have you enjoy it. So, however you have to enjoy it, power to you.
Yeah. So let's get into a little controversy. You mentioned before about the AI, at least AI written stuff. There's this, I think Audible now does it, Apple, like even Google, like, basically authors, if they want, can have their books narrated essentially by AI. Now, personally, I think it's awful. And I'm sure you
Thank
do
you.
too. But like, what is that thought right now in the community? Because I see some authors doing it, and I don't think they really get any like monetary gain out of it. I don't think like I think at least Audible, like for the authors who do it, I don't think they actually make any money off that. But it's I don't know. I mean, I don't know.
Well,
What are your thoughts?
there no surprise. I hate it.
Yeah.
It is threatening to our entire industry. It is a tearing down of an art form, a commercializing of an art form that I feel is so destructive. But commerce is commerce. And so I find that the authors who are using it most are indie authors who can't afford to turn their book into audio, but they want that revenue stream. Are they shooting themselves in the foot by getting a crappy AI voice to narrate their book? Maybe. Do some listeners care? Yeah, a lot of listeners do. Do some listeners not care? Probably. It's only going to get better. The technology is going to get better and better. It's pretty damn good now. When you
Yeah,
listen to
there was.
the
Yeah.
samples are pretty damn good.
Yeah.
However, from what I understand, when you listen to a big chunk of it over time,
Yeah.
it's not good. You hear the pattern, you hear the things that it can't do. But like I said, it will only get better. I think that there's nothing we can do at this point to the horse is out of the barn. We can't stop it. So we are trying to protect our voices. I've been ripped off. And I have no recourse because you can't find the source, and you can't prove that you've been ripped off.
Hmm.
So, we're trying to put protections in place that don't allow for machine learning of our work. And then there are union things happening within our union that are trying to create AI opportunity in a way that we can monetize. And so it's a hot button topic.
Yeah.
And we're all a little scared of it. But I think that we can't stick our heads in the sand and say it's going to go away. We need to make it go away. We're not going to make it go away. So we have to learn how to work with it and put up as many roadblocks as we can. And I think that part of that is also celebrating human storytelling and making sure that we continue to celebrate it and making sure people know that there's a difference. And a lot of that comes from the authors, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So, refusing to use that technology and say, no, I insist, I want a human voice.
Yeah.
So you'll see more and more in credits saying you may not use this for machine learning, and saying, this is a human voice on covers of audiobooks. We're lobbying to try to get that. They all have to
Mm.
be actually that anything AI will have to be like cigarettes, this is an AI voice. So you're not fooled by it.
Mm. Yeah, no, that's good. I mean, well, when it comes to audiobooks, obviously, I always feel that sometimes, again, I feel like narrators, some narrators definitely do kind of have a fan base in terms of listeners who really like and they'll listen to anything that they do. It always, I don't know. I never understand certain authors who just do not listen to. I guess I understand authors who don't listen to audiobooks, but there are certain authors out there I feel like who don't really care about audiobooks. Like, they don't care who the narrator is. They don't,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh,
and
for
they just
sure.
kind of dismiss audiobooks, especially because it's become such a big part of the market. Um, at what point, like, at what point did you realize you were starting to kind of, I don't want to necessarily say fan base, hopefully it is a fan base, but I mean that there were definitely people who were like paying attention, like, oh, there's a new book out that's narrated by Hillary.
I have no idea. I guess, I mean, the only metric by which to measure that is interaction on social media, isn't it? I mean, every now and then I'll get somebody who will take the trouble to go to my website and fill out my contact form, and contact me that way to say, wow, I loved your book. And I always make sure to write them back because I just can't believe anybody went to the trouble to find me. And I've gotten some nasty emails through there too, I have to say.
About
I
what?
got one. I have it on my website actually. I got an email from somebody. Oh no, that was a review. That was a review saying all of her men sound like Valley girls. I thought that was awesome. I put that on my website. All of her men sound like Valley girls. I thought that was great. So I think that's really the only metric I have by which to measure that there are people who like what I do. So it's, believe me, we work in such a vacuum. It's us alone in a little 4x4 cell. Every now and then we have a director, but most of the time we don't. We're just narrating that. We're reading stories aloud to ourselves, and we're performers. So we're hungry for feedback, and it's always delightful to get feedback. Always, it means a lot to us. And so when I see somebody comment on a post that about a book that's releasing, and they're like, I'll always listen to your books, it just makes me feel very gratified and grateful, that I'm being seen and heard and listened to, and that people are benefiting from my efforts. And unlike, commercials, this is like what I said a while ago, I'm leaving something on the earth that will be there for a while, that people can enjoy.
Yeah. So So right now, so back in the day, obviously, when you were narrating a book, you probably had to go to the publisher. You managed Blackstone, or well, you weren't going up to Oregon at the time, but I'm sure there were like studios that you would go into. And now a lot of narrators have their own studios in the home where they basically can just go in in their pajamas and narrate a book or whatever. When you have a typical narrating day, like what is your typical narrating day? How many hours are you spent, in the booth, actual doing recording? Like, so
Yeah,
for a novel that's like, so you just did Tess Gerritsen, the follow up to The Spy Coast. That book was probably, I don't know, I'm gonna say probably, I have no idea, but I'm assuming it's probably like 10
10
hours.
hours. Yeah,
Yeah.
like
So
10
like for like a
hours.
10-hour book, how long, like how many days, how many,
Yeah.
a week or two,
Mhm.
what's that usually like?
So basically, the rule of thumb is that it's going to take you 2 hours in the studio to get 1 hour of finished audio. Okay. So that's not necessarily time in the chair, but that's breaks and lunch and mistakes and looking words up, stuff like that. So a 10-hour book takes about 20 hours. And so that's 4 hours a day for 5 days, um, which is a pretty modest day for me. I recorded a book last week. It was a nonfiction book about a serial killer who killed all these teenage boys in Texas in the 1970s. It was horrible. And I had a director for that, and we recorded from 10 to 4 every day. It was like a 14-hour book, I think. And so, we did it in 5 days. I mean, I can go from 10 to 4. I usually get a little wonky after that. My head starts to go a little wonky. Some people can only record for 2 hours a day. We're all a little bit different.
Yeah.
I start to get twitchy around 3. I try to get in the booth by 10 every day. And just depending on how tight my deadline is, I'll stick it out, or I will think of 1,000 reasons why I should leave. Like, it's really important that I get to the grocery store before 3:30. I'm always looking for a way out. But yeah, I hope that answers your question. It takes about 2 hours to get 1 hour.
So when you have that book where you had a director, is that something where just they're like on a Zoom or something with you for the entire recording day? Whereas I guess with other ones, you're kind of by yourself. You record it, you send it in, they then send you back notes or whatever else, or pickups. I mean, how often are you getting pickups?
Oh, every single book, even when you have a director. So like with that book, it's not so much my performance that was being directed. It was, she was following along with the script and making sure I didn't make any mistakes. She'd catch my mistakes and we'd fix them on the fly. But even with a director, we had pickups every day that we'd get, the next morning that we'd do. And certainly when you're recording alone, I get tons of pickups. And you just fix them and they edit them in. And sometimes I have the book, if I'm lucky enough to have a director and the book is more performative, I guess. And it's nice to have another set of ears to listen to you and say, is that character sound legitimate? How did I say that line right? It's always good to have a director.
Yeah.
So that's a real luxury.
So when you are working on is it just one book at a time, or are there times where you might kind of, shuffle with like 2 projects where you might do
there are
some at
times when I
night?
might shuffle. I try not to shuffle my recording that much, but sometimes I have to. If I get let's say I get a last minute short story or something, I'll throw it in the middle of another book. That's what's great having your own studio and being your own boss is I can monkey things around. If I want to take off Thursday and it means I work on Saturday, I can do that. It's fine. What is a weekend? Weekends are nothing to the freelancer, right? You're a writer. You get that.
Yeah.
I'm not very good about Monday to Friday. I work when I need to work. Which recently has been a lot.
Yeah. So what about books? So we mentioned Spy Coast. You narrated that with Brittany Presley. And a lot of books nowadays, it feels like when there are, 2 main point of views, they'll bring in 2 different narrators. Some books, they'll bring in, I think, didn't you do a Geneva Rose book where there was
I
like
did.
4 or 5
Yeah,
other
there were 4
narrators?
of us.
So with those types of projects, are you actually reading the entire book, or are you just going to read just your character sections?
That's a great question. It really depends how big my part is and how much interaction I have with the other characters. If like I've had a couple multicasts recently where my part was tiny and I didn't read that. One of them was a fantasy book and I read like oracle-y kind of things. And I didn't read that whole book. It was like a 500-page book. And I'm not going to read that for less than an hour of recording time. There's no way. Geneva's book, I read the whole thing because we interacted throughout the whole thing. So I wanted to know what was going on with the story. So it really depends on the project.
But when you're doing a book like that, I mean, you're basically like on your own. You're not really, there's no reason. Well, so you were also, I believe, Wendy Walker's American Girl.
Mm-hmm.
Were you, and it's been a while since I listened to that, you weren't the main narrator, because I remember that was what, Page something, but like were you part of the actual, like it was like a drama type thing where like you were with
Yeah.
editor. So
Oh,
like was
yeah.
that
I didn't have
something
a
where
huge part in that one either. So, sometimes we'll collaborate with each other. So I just did one whose name is just going to escape me. And we actually, you know what? It was a series of short stories, but the short stories were all interrelated, but they were
Mm,
told from different POVs. And so there were, I don't know, 4 or 5 narrators on it. And we collaborated and sent each other, whoever main POV you had, the other POVs would show up in your short stories that you were reading. And so we collaborated with each other to make sure that this one has an accent, to hear what the other ones were doing with their character voice choices,
right.
so that we can be, not that I'm not gonna sound exactly like another actor's character, but so that we're on the same basic wavelength. So yeah, sometimes we chat.
Right, but I meant
And
more for
okay,
like the
actually
radio
being in the room.
drama types of things
Yeah, being
where
in the
it's like
room.
that back and forth,
Yeah.
it's not just like a
So
different chapters, but the actual
yeah.
interactions.
So I just did one like that too. And where was I? Where I just saw the producer. Oh, I know. It was Ben Edwards from Blackstone. I just interviewed him for a little webinar that I do. And he asked me about that because in this story that I did, it was written like a screenplay. And so I was one character in the screenplay, and I just did my lines. And he asked me in this interview, he said, "Is that a bummer for you to just do your lines and not have another actor to play off?" Sure, it's a bummer. I'd rather have another actor to play off, right? So you have
Yeah.
to imagine how you're reacting to the character who fed you the line, right? And so it's probably a headache for the editor. You want to hope that it lines up. The pinch matches the ouch, is what I like to say. But it's very cost prohibitive. If you put us all in a studio simultaneously, or even get us all Zooming simultaneously, so we do it live, you have to pay us differently. You have to pay
Mm,
us for hours,
interesting. Yeah.
hours in studio rather finished. We get paid by the finished length of the book,
Okay.
right? We get an hourly rate based on the finished length of the book.
Right.
So in that case, they would have to pay us an actual in studio hourly rate, and 5 narrators at whatever rate it's cost prohibitive. So sometimes it gets done. But it depends on what the budget is and how big the book is.
Yeah.
Does that
Yeah,
answer
because
that?
yeah, I mean some of these books nowadays, I feel it looked like actually I was just looking here on Audible. You just did one recently, and it looks like there was like 10 other narrators on it. It's called The Trip. No, The Business
The
Trip.
business trip?
Yeah.
Yeah, the business trip.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there's
a
it
bunch
looks
of
like
us.
there's a good like probably 10 other narrators on that one,
Yeah.
and it's like a
That
nine
one
hour book.
we all had our own separate POVs on in that. It wasn't like dual where it's back and forth.
Hmm. Okay.
So that one, in that case, there's no need to get you all in the studio simultaneously. But if they're gonna do line by line, you read all your character lines, that's when you'd want to all be in the room together. I
Um,
did a I did a romance book once for Lauren Blakely, who's a very successful romance author. And I don't do a lot of romance, so it was really fun for me. But she booked a studio in Hollywood, and she had us all come in. And it's a scheduling thing because you're like, we didn't read the book um, chronologically. We read, she broke it up so that when I've got these 5 actors, I'm doing these scenes, and then this one leaves and this one comes. You have to stay, but now, but we spent a day or two, over 2 days. I went in once, and then she had made sure I overlapped with the actors that I had scenes with, but we were all in the booth together, and it was pretty great.
yeah. Well, let's talk about pet peeves. At this
Okay.
point, like tips for authors who are out there.
Yeah.
I'm assuming again because there are times where, again, going back to listening to certain books where you can tell that an author probably does not listen to audiobooks because I feel like there's a speech tag between two characters every single line of dialogue, and it's like, what are they doing here? Like, I mean, is there anything that you found where you're just like you kind of roll your eyes and you're like,
Yeah.
okay, here we go.
Yeah. Because let's just preface this by saying we have to read what's on the page. So if you, as an author, write, "I do not like to eat broccoli," I don't get to say I don't like to eat broccoli. I have to say I do not like to eat broccoli. So one of my pet peeves is authors who don't write dialogue the way people talk, right?
Those are
Use
those AI books,
contractions.
probably.
We speak in contractions,
Yeah.
unless that character does not speak in contractions and they are very proper and they prefer to use all the long words. So I would say to authors, read your dialogue out loud so that you know it sounds real and literally the way people talk. Um, uh, don't make any of your characters be from New Zealand because I can't do that accent.
How many accents can you do?
I can do a lot of accents.
Do you
I can
speak
do
any
a
other
lot.
languages?
Yeah, I do. I can speak, I mean, not fluently, but I can speak pretty good French and fairly good Italian.
Oh,
Um, and are all my accents 100% authentic? Probably not, but they're good enough for the most part. I have black holes in New Zealand. I'm Australian. I'm pretty sure I sound like Crocodile Dundee. So um, I'm not very good at South African either. But for the most part, I can fake a lot of them. I know Lisa Gardner's next book, I think she's taking me to the Middle East. So that'll be fun.
oh
Her
boy.
last one I had
Well,
Australian.
yeah, well, so like let's talk about like so Lisa's most recent one, her third book in the Frankie was it Elkin series?
Frankie
Is that
Elkin. Yeah,
Elkin?
Frankie Elkin.
You said so that's nominated for an Audie Award.
It is.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank
Um,
you.
when you work on a series book, I imagine in a way it's kind of easy because you did the first book and you kind of know these characters, so now you're jumping to the second book, you're really familiar with these characters. Or is it not? I mean, is it a different type of prep when you're already on like, okay, book three or four? I'm assuming because you're kind of familiar with the protagonist, or is that
Well,
not?
no, but the story's different, and
The story
especially
is,
like
yes,
with
the story's
those
different,
books, Frankie is the constant. She's the protagonist of
but
those
she
books,
travels all over.
but she travels. So every
Yeah.
other character is a new character. Um, Cozy mysteries, which I do a lot of also, you will have you have a pretty good set cast of characters in a cozy mystery that will appear in every single book, but you will also get new characters.
Yeah.
So, you want to prep your new characters, but you've got your old ones down. Like I do this one series and I'm on like book 16 in the
Hmm.
this cozy mystery series. And I know these characters, they're like friends of mine at this point. I can call them up like that. Um,
Do you have to go back then before because it's probably been a year or so since you recorded the previous book. Do you
yeah,
have to
yeah,
kind of
yeah.
go back to kind
Yeah.
of
Oh,
be like, wait, how
100%.
does these characters sound?
I have to do it within a book, actually. So there is not a character that I record that I don't keep a sample of. I immediately take a sample of their dialogue and I label it with their name, and it goes into a bin in my Pro Tools. So I'm doing a book right now that is written in all um, text messages, emails, letters to the editor, diary entries, all written from different characters' POVs. And it may be 30 pages before there's another email from one of the characters. And I could just go and hear what I did so I can get that character in my head again. So I keep samples of everything. I will usually take a sample of a character at the beginning of a book, and I'll take a sample of them at the end of the book because their voice will probably change a little bit as I get to know them. And if there is you never know if there's a sequel, do you? Sometimes there's a sequel. Sometimes there isn't a sequel because everybody died. But sometimes you don't know. And so I want to have the way that character sounded at the end of the previous book to pick up in the next book. So I'll take a sample at the end also
Yeah.
because they might have changed. So Frankie is me. I don't have to think about her at all. Um, but yeah, no, I'm pretty diligent about keeping samples of characters. There's
So the
nothing
odd
worse than getting a sequel to a book you recorded a couple years ago and being like, do I have to listen to that to hear what I did? Uh,
so the
don't make me listen to me.
So
Hmm.
the Audies are next week. You said it's like a banquet type thing. Is it also like a because I think you were at Thriller Fest last year, right? Because I think I saw you on a
I was at
panel.
Thriller Fest. Yeah.
There was an audiobook panel. Like what type of like conference does like audiobook
Well, there's
narrators
two different
have?
things. There's a conference, which is so we have a trade organization, the Audio Publisher Association, and they put on a trade conference, and that'll be on Monday. And there's a business track for the publishers, and there's a performance track for the actors. And so there's different panels throughout the day, and then it's all about what happens in the hallway, all the schmoozing that goes on in the hallway. And there's cocktail parties, and publishers have parties and all kinds of stuff. And then there is our award show, which is called the Audies. It's like our Oscars. And it's once a year, always held in conjunction with APAC. And it's a gala. So we all dress up. We're super excited to get our hair done and put on makeup and wear fancy clothes and go out and schmooze and get our pictures taken. So we love it. And there's usually a host, and sometimes it's a seated dinner that the show happens. This year it's not. We're in a theater, and then the parties after. They change it up all the time. But it's a real celebration of our art, and we're very, very, very close community. We are all friends, and we love to celebrate each other and encourage each other. So it's just it's a really joyous, exciting time for us. It's really
Yeah.
fun.
No, it's really great that you guys have kind of your own awards because I feel like the other writing awards that also include audiobooks, correct me if I'm wrong, but most of the times, like if an author's book wins an audiobook, only the author gets that award. Like you guys don't get awards, right? I mean, you know what I mean?
I don't
Like
even know of
copy.
any other ones. I mean, we get audio awards, but I don't
Yeah.
know of any other ones where there are awards. Are there that
Hmm.
we're missing out on?
Yeah.
Are there other?
We'll talk after. I don't want to say anything
No,
online.
Thriller Fest does one. I know
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Scott and Greg won last year, so I know that.
Right, but I think there was only like one trophy, and I think Greg got. You know what I mean? Like
Oh
I don't
yeah.
think Scott. You know what I mean? Like it's one of those things. Like obviously he won the. You know he's part of that, but at the same time they only give a trophy
Yeah, you can
to
usually buy another
the author.
trophy if you want one. Mhm.
So okay, what do you have? Yeah, we're up to that. So what are there any projects that you think people should be aware of that are coming up in the next couple of months?
Oh God, you didn't let me prep that, did you? Well, yeah, Lisa Gardner's next book is coming out in June, which I'm really excited about. That's I just recorded it, and can I remember the name of it? No, I can't. But that's coming out in June. I just wrote about it too. I've got a couple non thriller ones coming up that I really had a good time with. One is by Colleen Oakley called Dan and Jane at the End of the World, and that was a really fun book. And actually, the one I'm narrating right now, I'm infatuated with, and it's called A Town with Half the Lights On, by Julie Arts. And it's such a creative, just the way it's written, like the one with all the text messages.
Hmm.
That's a great book too. So I've been recording a lot of books that I really like, and I have a couple coming up that I really like. So yeah, I'm in a good place right now with books I like. If
Yeah.
I could just remember all the titles. It's
Well,
really
it's been
hard.
over 800. I can imagine you know,
Really hard.
it's difficult. I mean, you've probably come across a book where you're like, do you ever like, you know, you're on Audible, just browsing to listen to a book and you're like, "Oh, this looks interesting." You're like, "Oh, wait, I
Oh
read
wait, I
this
narrated
10
that.
years ago
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
something."
Yeah. 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 It's funny. You don't remember. I'd like to. I used to think that it was a sign of my misspent youth that I like burned up too many brain cells that I can't remember everything I've recorded, but I've decided that it's not. When I'm performing a book, even when I'm reading the book, I'm not reading that book to take the information in and enjoy it. I'm reading it with a mind toward putting it out into the world. And so maybe that's just justification, but that's my thinking. I want to get it out there. I want to get out of the way. That is my absolute biggest goal. If a friend of mine is listening to me narrate, a book, I want her maybe for the first chapter or two to be like, oh, there's Hillary. Hillary's still talking. And then I want her to forget it's me. I want to get out of the way. And this isn't a one woman show. This is an author's work. And I am there just to serve those words to a listener in a way that is clear, concise, and fits the author's intent. So that's my goal.
Yeah. And I think that's a great place to end it. So, Hillary, thank you so much for hanging out. Everybody,
Robert, thank you.
go
Love
check
talking
out all of
audiobooks.
Hillary's books. Start with Season of the Snake. That's presently the first one you
Oh,
want to do. Actually, I'm really curious now. I think I'm gonna have to go check it out. But I definitely, you have the new Tess Gerritsen who's coming out in like I think like next month, right?
yeah, Tess is coming out, and there's going to be a new Meg Gardner coming soon, who I
Oh,
love
good.
also. I do a series for her.
The
It's
Unsub
great.
series.
Yes, the Unsub series. They're so dark.
So,
Yeah, so there's some good ones coming.
and good luck next week at the Audies.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll end it with this. I've been nominated 19 times and I've never won.
So you're like the
I
Susan
am the
Lucci of the
Susan
Audies.
Lucci of audiobooks. Yes, I am.
But she won it at some point,
She
didn't she?
finally won. I
She
know. I think
did
they gave
finally
her.
win.
I think they gave her an achievement award or something. I hope it doesn't come to that. Please don't give me an achievement award. Yeah,
All
we'll see.
right.
One of
So
these
everyone,
days.
yeah, check out Hillary's stuff. So thanks, Hillary. See you
Thank you,
next
Robert.
time.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thanks.